The rain fell upon London like a curse, cold and unrelenting, turning the cobblestones into mirrors that reflected nothing but misery. The year was 1873, and the city churned with the smoke of 1,000 factories, each one a monument to progress built upon the broken backs of the desperate. Among those desperate souls was Eleanor Whitmore, 24 years of age, her dark auburn hair tucked beneath a worn bonnet, her grey eyes holding a determination that poverty had not yet managed to extinguish. She moved through the narrow streets of Whitechapel with purpose, one hand pressed protectively against her abdomen, where a secret grew, a secret that would soon change everything. The Ashford and Sons textile factory loomed ahead, a brutal structure of blackened brick and iron, its windows like vacant eyes staring down at the workers, who filed through its gates each morning before dawn. Eleanor had worked there for 3 years, ever since her husband Thomas had died in a factory accident, crushed beneath machinery that was never properly maintained. The company had paid her nothing, offered no condolences, merely replaced him with another desperate soul within the day. She had learned then that in this world, human life was cheaper than the thread they spun. Inside the factory, the air was thick with cotton dust that coated the lungs and shortened lives. The machines clattered in a relentless rhythm, drowning out thought, drowning out hope. Eleanor took her place at her station, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the loom. Around her, women worked in silence, their faces gaunt, their bodies bent from endless hours of labor. They were ghosts, really, living specters who existed only to feed the great machine of industry. Eleanor had once believed she could escape this fate, but widowhood had taught her the truth. There was no escape. There was only survival. It was near midday when the foreman, Silas Griggs, approached her station. He was a thick man with a cruel mouth and eyes like chips of flint. He had made advances toward Eleanor before, crude suggestions whispered when no one else could hear, hands that lingered too long when passing by. She had rejected him each time, maintaining a dignity that infuriated him. Now he stood before her with a smile that held no warmth, only malice. "You are wanted in Mr. Ashford's office," he said, his voice carrying over the noise of the machines. The other women glanced up briefly, then quickly returned to their work. No one wanted to draw attention to themselves. Being summoned to the owner's office was never good news. Eleanor's heart quickened, but she kept her expression calm. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed Griggs through the factory floor, past rows of machines and workers, up the iron stairs to the administrative offices above. Here the air was cleaner, the floors polished, the walls decorated with paintings of hunting scenes and pastoral landscapes. It was a different world, separated from the hell below by a single floor, yet it might as well have been another continent. Mr. Jonathan Ashford sat behind a massive oak desk, his portly frame settled into a leather chair that creaked with his weight. He was a man of 50, his face florid from too much rich food and port wine, his fingers adorned with gold rings. Beside him stood his son, Edmund, a younger version of his father, but with a streak of cruelty that the elder Ashford concealed beneath a veneer of respectability. Edmund's eyes travelled over Eleanor's form with an appreciation that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jonathan Ashford began, his voice heavy with false concern, "it has come to our attention that you are with child. Is this true?" Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had been careful, so careful to hide her condition, but the sickness in the mornings, the way her dresses had begun to tighten, these things could not be hidden forever. She lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "It is true, sir," she said quietly, "but it does not affect my work. I have not missed a single day." Jonathan Ashford exchanged a glance with his son, and Edmund smirked. "That is not the issue, Mrs. Whitmore," the elder Ashford continued. "This is a respectable establishment. We cannot have unwed mothers working here. It sets a poor example for the other women." "I am not unwed, sir," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I am a widow. My husband died in a factory accident 3 years ago." "Yes, yes," Ashford waved his hand dismissively. "But you are with child, and there is no husband present. It amounts to the same thing in the eyes of society. We must think of our reputation." Edmund Ashford leaned forward, his smile widening. "Perhaps we could come to an arrangement," he suggested, his tone oily. If you were to accept certain considerations from me, we might overlook this unfortunate situation. I could ensure you remain employed, even provide you with better accommodations. All it would require is a bit of flexibility on your part." The meaning was clear, and Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat. She looked from son to father and saw no mercy in either face. They were not men. They were predators, and she was prey. "For 3 years I have given this company my labor," she said, her voice trembling now with anger rather than fear. "I have breathed in the dust that kills. I have worked until my hands bled. I have asked for nothing but fair wages for fair work. And this is how you repay loyalty?" "Loyalty," Jonathan Ashford laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "My dear woman, loyalty is a luxury you cannot afford. You are dismissed effective immediately. Griggs will escort you from the premises. You will not receive wages for this week, as you are leaving under disgraceful circumstances. Consider yourself fortunate we do not demand repayment for the training we invested in you." Eleanor stood frozen, the world tilting around her. Without wages, without work, she had nothing. The room she rented would be lost within the week. There were no charities that would take in a pregnant widow, no workhouse that would accept her until she had exhausted every other option. And the workhouses were places where souls went to die slowly, where children were taken from their mothers and sold as labor to anyone who would pay. "Please," she whispered, hating herself for the plea but unable to stop it. "I will work harder. I will take any position. I need this work. My child needs this work." "Your child," Edmund Ashford said with a cold smile, "is not our concern. You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for whoever got you in this condition." The slap came before Eleanor could think. Her palm connected with Edmund's cheek with a crack that echoed through the office. The shock on his face would have been satisfying if Eleanor had not immediately realized what she had done. Edmund's expression transformed from surprise to rage, his hand rising to the reddening mark on his face. "You filthy whore," he snarled, lunging toward her. "Enough!" his father barked. "Edmund, control yourself." He turned to the door and shouted, "Griggs! Remove this woman from the premises immediately, and see that she never sets foot in any Ashford property again." Griggs appeared with 2 other men, burly workers who served as enforcers when the factory owners needed muscle rather than words. They grabbed Eleanor by the arms, and though she struggled, their grip was iron. She was dragged from the office, down the stairs, past the machines where women watched with fearful eyes, knowing any of them could be next. They threw her into the street like refuse, and the factory gates slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed through her bones. Eleanor knelt in the mud, the rain soaking through her clothes, and for a moment she could not move. The child within her fluttered, a small movement that reminded her she was not alone. She had to survive, not for herself but for this innocent life that depended on her. She pulled herself to her feet, wiped the mud from her hands, and began the long walk back to her lodgings. She did not know that she was being watched. High above the city, standing upon the balcony of a Gothic mansion that overlooked London like a dark sentinel, Count Dracula observed the scene below through eyes that had witnessed centuries of human suffering. He had come to London seeking new hunting grounds, drawn by the sprawling population and the countless souls lost in the machinery of progress. But something about the woman in the street below caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she stood after being thrown down, the way she refused to surrender to despair. Perhaps it was the protective hand she placed upon her abdomen, a gesture of maternal love that stirred something long dormant in his dead heart. He had been a man once, so long ago that the memory felt like a dream. He had loved, had fought, had believed in honor and justice, but immortality had stripped those things away, leaving only hunger and an endless, aching void. He fed on the living because he must, but he took no pleasure in it anymore. Existence had become a burden, each night a repetition of the last, stretching forward into an eternity that promised nothing but emptiness. Yet watching this mortal woman, alone and cast out, struggling to survive against a world that cared nothing for her suffering, he felt something shift within him. It was not desire, not in the way he had known with countless victims across the centuries. It was something more troubling, recognition, perhaps, or empathy. He saw in her struggle an echo of his own damnation, The futile fight against forces that could not be defeated, only endured. He turned from the balcony and retreated into the shadows of his mansion, where no light penetrated and no warmth remained. His servant, a gnarled creature named Renfield, who had long ago traded his sanity for the promise of immortality, scurried forward. "Master," the creature hissed, "do you hunger? Shall I bring you prey?" "No," Dracula said quietly, "not tonight." He moved to the window and looked out over London, this city of millions where suffering was as common as breath. "Find out everything about the woman," he commanded. "Her name, her circumstances, her enemies, everything." Renfield cackled, a sound like breaking glass. "As you wish, master, as you wish." He vanished into the darkness, leaving Dracula alone with thoughts that troubled him more than any dream of his lost humanity. In her small rented room in Whitechapel, Eleanor Whitmore counted the coins she had saved. It was not enough. It would never be enough. The rent was due in 3 days, and after that she would be homeless. She had no family, no friends who could take her in. She had only herself and the child growing within her. She lay down upon her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, where water stains formed shapes like angels or demons, depending on how one looked at them. She did not pray. She had stopped believing in God when her husband died, and no divine intervention came to save her. She had stopped believing in justice when she saw how the powerful crushed the weak without consequence. All she believed in now was survival, and even that belief was wavering. Yet somewhere in the darkness of that London night, forces were already moving. Ancient and terrible forces that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with a vampire's curiosity. Eleanor Whitmore did not know it yet, but her fate had become entangled with something far older and far more dangerous than any mortal cruelty. The Count had taken an interest, and when Dracula fixed his attention upon something, the world itself began to change. The rain continued to fall, washing the filth from the streets only to reveal more filth beneath. And in the shadows between the gaslight, things that should not exist stirred and began to hunt. 3 days passed like a slow death. Eleanor moved through them in a haze of desperation, going from door to door seeking work, only to be turned away at each one. The factories wanted young, strong workers, not pregnant widows who would soon need time for childbirth. The shops wanted girls with family connections or dowries to invest. The grand houses wanted servants, with references from respectable employers, and Eleanor's dismissal from Ashford and Sons had somehow spread through the networks of gossip faster than plague through crowded tenements. On the morning of the 4th day, her landlady, Mrs. Hobbs, knocked upon her door with a face of stone. "The rent is due, Mrs. Whitmore," the woman said without preamble. "You have until tonight to pay what you owe, or you will be on the street. I have other tenants waiting, and I cannot afford charity cases." Eleanor had known this was coming, yet hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. She nodded mutely and closed the door, then sat upon her bed and stared at her hands. They were rough from years of factory work, the nails broken, the fingers calloused. These hands had worked so hard, had earned so little, and now they held nothing at all. She placed them upon her abdomen, feeling the slight swell there, and wondered what kind of world she was bringing a child into, a world without mercy, without justice, without hope. The morning light filtered through her single grimy window, and Eleanor made a decision. She would go to the workhouse. It was surrender, the final admission of defeat, but at least there she and her child would not starve in the gutter. She gathered her few possessions into a worn carpet bag, taking only what she could carry. Her wedding ring, the only thing of value she owned, she kept on her finger. It was all she had left of Thomas, and she would not part with it unless starvation itself demanded it. As she descended the narrow stairs of the boarding house, she heard voices in the front parlour. Mrs. Hobbs was speaking with someone, her tone obsequious in the way it only became when dealing with her betters. Eleanor paused, not wanting to be seen, but the conversation drifted clearly to her ears. "You are certain you have the correct address?" the visitor asked. His voice was cultured, with an accent Eleanor could not quite place. Eastern European, perhaps, but smoothed by years of speaking English. "Quite certain, sir," Mrs. Hobbs replied. "Eleanor Whitmore, 3rd floor rear room. Though I must warn you, she's behind on her rent and will be evicted by evening." "That will not be necessary," the man said. I am here to settle all her accounts and to deliver a message from her new employer." Eleanor's heart stopped. New employer? It was impossible. She had applied nowhere that would have contacted her so quickly, and certainly nowhere that would send a gentleman to settle her debts. She moved down the remaining stairs, her curiosity overcoming her caution. The man who stood in Mrs. Hobbs's parlour was tall and impeccably dressed in a black suit that must have cost more than Eleanor earned in a year. His hair was dark and swept back from a high forehead, his features aristocratic and pale, as though he rarely saw sunlight. But it was his eyes that arrested her attention. They were dark, almost black, and they held a depth that seemed to contain centuries rather than years. When he looked at her, Eleanor felt as though he could see through her skin to the very soul beneath. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, inclining his head in a gesture that belonged to another era. "I am Mr. Cornelius, representative of the Blackthorn Investment Company. My employer has recently acquired the Ashford and Sons textile factory and wishes to offer you reinstatement at your former position, with back pay for the time you were unjustly dismissed." Eleanor could only stare. The words made no sense. Why would anyone acquire that miserable factory? And why would they care about one dismissed worker? "I do not understand," she managed to say. Mr. Cornelius smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "My employer is a man of principle, Mrs. Whitmore. When he learned of the circumstances of your dismissal, he was most displeased. Justice, he believes, must be served. The Ashfords no longer have any authority at the factory. You are to report there tomorrow morning, where you will find conditions much improved." He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather purse heavy with coin. "This is 3 months' wages in advance," he said, placing it in Eleanor's trembling hands. "Consider it compensation for your suffering and security for your coming months of motherhood. The company has also arranged for better lodgings for you, closer to the factory in a building we own. Mrs. Hobbs here will provide you with the address." Eleanor looked down at the purse, then back at the strange man before her. This must be some trick, some cruel joke. No one gave away money like this. No one cared about the suffering of factory workers. And yet the weight of the coins in her hand was real enough. "Who is your employer?" she asked. "Why would he do this for someone he has never met?" Mr. Cornelius's expression became unreadable. "My employer is a very private man, Mrs. Whitmore. He prefers to remain anonymous in his charitable works. Suffice it to say, he believes that cruelty should not go unpunished and that innocence deserves protection. He has taken a personal interest in your welfare." There was something in the way he said personal interest that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. But she was in no position to refuse. She needed this help, needed it desperately, and whatever the mysterious benefactor's motives, they could not be worse than starving in the street. "I accept," she said quietly, "and I am grateful. Please convey my thanks to your employer." "He will be pleased to hear it," Mr. Cornelius said. "One more thing, Mrs. Whitmore. You will find that certain individuals who wronged you have met with unfortunate circumstances. Do not trouble yourself about them. Justice, as I said, must be served." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and you will find that the factory's new management has implemented significant reforms. Shorter hours, better ventilation, fair wages. My employer believes that workers are more productive when they are not being worked to death. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. We will be watching over you." He departed, leaving Eleanor standing in the parlour with a purse full of money and a head full of questions. Mrs. Hobbs looked at her with new eyes, the eyes of someone reassessing another's worth. "Well, well," the landlady said. "It seems you have friends in high places after all. I will prepare a receipt for the rent you owe, and I suppose there is no rush for you to leave now." Eleanor barely heard her. She returned to her room and sat upon the bed, opening the purse and counting the coins within. It was more money than she had seen in years, enough to live comfortably for months, perhaps longer if she was careful. But the words of Mr. Cornelius echoed in her mind. Certain individuals who wronged you have met with unfortunate circumstances. What did that mean? She would discover the answer that very evening. As darkness fell over London and the gaslights flickered to life along the streets, whispers began to spread through Whitechapel. Edmund Ashford had been found dead in his study, his throat torn out, his body drained of blood. The constable said it was an animal attack, perhaps a rabid dog that had somehow entered the house, but others spoke of something far more sinister. They spoke of a dark figure seen on the rooftops, of red eyes gleaming in the shadows, of an ancient evil that had come to London. And at the Ashford factory, Jonathan Ashford had suffered a complete mental collapse. He sat in his office, gibbering about shadows that whispered and hands that reached for him from the darkness. The doctors said it was apoplexy, a sudden madness brought on by the shock of his son's death. But those who saw him knew better. They saw the terror in his eyes, the way he flinched at every sound, the way he begged for mercy from things that were not there. Silas Griggs, the foreman, had vanished entirely. His rooms were found abandoned, his belongings left behind, as though he had fled in the middle of the night without stopping to gather even his coat. Some said he had run from creditors, others said he had been seen in the rookeries, a broken man drinking himself to death in the lowest gin houses, and a few, very few, whispered that he had been taken by something that hunted in the night. Eleanor learned of these events the next morning when she arrived at the factory. The other workers spoke of little else, their voices hushed with fear and morbid curiosity. She listened to their gossip and felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Mr. Cornelius had said that justice would be served, but this was not justice. This was vengeance, swift and terrible. The factory itself had indeed changed. The windows had been opened, allowing fresh air to circulate. The machines had been serviced and now ran more smoothly, less dangerously. There were scheduled breaks for meals, and the hours had been reduced from 14 to 10 per day. A new foreman, a quiet man named Davies, who treated the workers with respect, oversaw operations. It was as though the factory had been transformed overnight from a place of suffering into something almost bearable. Eleanor took her place at her loom, but her mind was far away. She thought of the man who had sent Mr. Cornelius, this anonymous benefactor, who wielded such power and such ruthlessness. What manner of person could acquire a factory in days, implement sweeping reforms, and destroy those who had wronged a single worker? And why had he chosen her? What did he want in return? The day passed in a blur of work and worry. When evening came and she returned to her new lodgings, a small but clean apartment in a respectable building, she found a letter waiting for her. It was written on fine paper in an elegant hand, the script flowing like dark water across the page. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore," it read, "you do not know me, but I have taken an interest in your welfare. I have witnessed the injustice done to you and have taken steps to correct it. You may wonder why I do this. The answer is simple. I have lived long enough to grow weary of cruelty, and I have power enough to punish it. You are innocent, and innocence is rare in this world. It should be protected. You need not fear me, nor need you feel indebted. I ask nothing of you but that you live, that you bring your child into this world, and that you remember that not all who dwell in darkness are evil. Some of us merely exist there because we have no place in the light. Your humble servant, a friend." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, trying to understand the mind behind the words. There was something melancholy in them, something that spoke of profound loneliness. Whoever this benefactor was, he was not simply a wealthy philanthropist. He was something else, something other. And despite the violence that had been done in her name, she found herself feeling not fear, but a strange curiosity. That night, as she lay in her new bed in her new rooms, Eleanor Whitmore dreamed of shadows that moved with purpose and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. She dreamed of a presence watching over her, neither guardian angel nor demon, but something in between. And in her dream, she was not afraid. High above the city, in his Gothic mansion, Count Dracula stood at his window and looked out over the sprawling mass of London. He had not felt this alive in centuries, if alive was even the word for what he was. The woman stirred something in him, something he had thought long dead. Not desire, not in the carnal sense. It was something purer and more dangerous. Hope. The hope that perhaps after all these centuries of damnation, he might find something worth existing for, something that could give meaning to the endless nights. Renfield crept into the room, his eyes gleaming with madness and devotion. "The Ashford men are dealt with, master," he croaked. "The young one dead, the old one mad, the foreman fled. Your will is done. Dracula did not turn from the window. "And the woman?" he asked. "Is she safe? Is she settled?" "She is, master. She reads your letter even now." "Good," Dracula said softly. "Very good." He was silent for a long moment, then spoke again. "Renfield, do you remember what it was to be human? To care for another soul more than for your own existence?" Renfield cackled. "I remember only hunger, master. Hunger and the promise of eternal life." Dracula sighed. "Then you understand nothing. But perhaps that is better. To understand would be to suffer." He turned from the window and retreated into the depths of his mansion, where no light penetrated and no warmth dwelt. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, the darkness did not feel quite so absolute. There was a small spark now, faint but persistent. A reason to continue. A woman named Eleanor, and the child she carried, and the mad hope that perhaps even a monster might find redemption. The weeks that followed brought a stability to Eleanor's life that felt almost dreamlike. She worked at the reformed factory, where the conditions improved daily under the mysterious new ownership. The workers whispered among themselves about their good fortune, afraid to speak too loudly lest it all vanish like morning mist. Eleanor saved her wages carefully, preparing for the child that grew within her. Her body changed, her belly swelling with life, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to feel something like happiness. But the letters continued to arrive. Once a week, sometimes twice, she would find an envelope waiting for her, always on fine paper, always in that elegant, flowing script. The mysterious benefactor never signed his name, only referred to himself as a friend, but his words revealed a soul in torment. He wrote of loneliness that spanned centuries, of watching humanity from the shadows, of the burden of existence without purpose. He never asked for anything, never demanded gratitude or sought to meet her. He simply wrote, as though she were the only person in the world who might understand. Eleanor found herself writing back. It began as simple thank-you notes, expressions of gratitude for all he had done. But gradually her letters grew longer, more personal. She wrote of her fears for the child, her memories of Thomas, her struggles to find meaning in a world that seemed designed to crush anyone without wealth or power. She wrote to this stranger things she had never told another living soul, and in return, he wrote to her with an honesty that was both beautiful and terrifying. In one letter, he wrote of his homeland, a place of mountains and ancient castles where superstition still held more power than science. He wrote of a time when he had been a warrior, defending his people against invaders, making choices that damned his soul but saved his nation. He wrote of the moment he had traded his humanity for power, believing it a noble sacrifice, only to discover that immortality was not a gift, but a curse. He wrote of the endless nights, the hunger that could never be truly satisfied, the isolation of watching everyone he had ever loved turn to dust while he remained unchanged. Eleanor read these letters by candlelight, and though part of her knew she should be frightened, another part felt only compassion. This man, whoever he was, carried a burden heavier than any she had known. He had saved her when no one else would, had asked nothing in return, and now offered her the gift of his trust. How could she do less than offer him hers? It was during the 8th week of this strange correspondence that Eleanor first sensed she was being watched. Not by her benefactor, whose presence she had come to associate with safety, but by something else, something hostile. She would catch glimpses of men in dark coats loitering near the factory, their eyes scanning the workers as they departed. Once, she saw a man with a silver cross hanging from his neck, his fingers moving over it in what seemed like prayer, as he stared directly at her. The feeling of being observed grew stronger, until one evening, as she walked home through the gaslit streets, she realized she was being followed. 2 men, both dressed in black, both moving with a purpose that was unmistakable. Eleanor quickened her pace, her heart hammering in her chest. She was 6 months pregnant now, her movements slower, her body vulnerable. She could not run, could not fight. All she could do was hurry toward the safety of her building and hope she reached it before they reached her. She was still 2 blocks away when they closed the distance. One of them grabbed her arm, spinning her around. He was middle-aged with grey streaking his dark hair, his face weathered and hard. His companion was younger, barely 20, with the fervor of a true believer burning in his eyes. Both wore crosses, and the older man held a leather-bound book that Eleanor recognized as a Bible. "Eleanor Whitmore," the older man said. It was not a question. "We need to speak with you about the creature that has taken an interest in you." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "I do not know what you mean. Let me go." The younger man stepped closer, his voice urgent. "You are in terrible danger, Mrs. The thing that watches over you, the one who calls himself your benefactor, he is not human. He is a vampire, one of the damned, and he has marked you for reasons we do not yet understand. You must come with us. We can protect you." Eleanor tried to pull her arm free, but the older man's grip was iron. "I do not need protection," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Whoever has helped me has done so out of kindness." "He has harmed no one," the older man repeated, his voice thick with disgust. "Edmund Ashford is dead, his throat torn out. Jonathan Ashford is mad, driven insane by visions of hell. Silas Griggs was found 3 days ago in the Thames, his body drained of blood. These are not the acts of kindness, woman. These are the acts of a monster." "They deserved what they received," Eleanor said, and was shocked by the vehemence in her own voice. "They were cruel men who destroyed lives without thought. If something punished them, then perhaps there is justice in this world after all." The younger man looked horrified. "You defend him? You defend a creature that drinks blood and walks in darkness? Do you not understand what he is, what he will do to you?" Before Eleanor could respond, the temperature around them dropped precipitously. The gaslights flickered and dimmed, and shadows seemed to deepen and move with purpose. The two men released Eleanor and stepped back, their hands moving to the crosses at their necks. The older man opened his Bible and began to recite Latin in a voice that trembled despite his obvious experience. From the shadows between buildings a figure emerged. He was tall and imposing, dressed in black that seemed to absorb what little light remained. His face was pale as death, beautiful in the way a sculpture is beautiful, perfect and cold. But his eyes, those dark eyes that Eleanor had seen only in her dreams, blazed with an anger that was terrible to behold. "You will not touch her," Count Dracula said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the very air. "She is under my protection, and I do not permit trespassers." The older man held up his cross, his Latin prayers growing louder. "Creature of darkness," he shouted, "we are servants of the Holy Church, and we command you in the name of God to release this woman from your influence." Dracula laughed, a sound without humor. "The Church," he said, "the same Church that blessed the swords of those who slaughtered innocents in the name of God, the same Church that burns the innocent and protects the guilty. Do not speak to me of God, priest. I have seen what men do in his name, and it is far more monstrous than anything I have ever done." He moved forward, and though his steps were measured, unhurried, both men retreated before him. Eleanor watched, caught between terror and fascination. This was her benefactor, the man who had written her such melancholy letters, revealed now in his true form. And he was indeed a vampire, one of the undead creatures that haunted folklore and nightmare. Yet he had come to protect her, had placed himself between her and those who would harm her. "You have 3 seconds to leave," Dracula said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than any shout. 1, 2. He did not reach 3. The two men fled, their footsteps echoing in the empty street. Only when they had vanished into the darkness did Dracula turn to Eleanor. She stood frozen, one hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly, her grey eyes wide, but not, he noted, filled with the terror he had expected. "You are Count Dracula," she said quietly, "the vampire of legend, the monster that mothers use to frighten children into obedience." "I am," he acknowledged, "and I apologize for revealing myself in such a manner. I had hoped to remain in shadow to protect you without burdening you with the truth of what I am. But those hunters would not have left you alone. They believe that to save your soul they must separate you from my influence." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, studying this creature before her. He was not what she had expected. The stories spoke of evil incarnate, of a beast without conscience or compassion. But the being before her, despite his obvious power and the aura of danger that surrounded him, seemed almost sad. His eyes held the weight of centuries, and in them she saw the same loneliness that filled his letters. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why did you help me?" Why do you care what happens to one mortal woman in a city of millions?" Dracula was quiet, and when he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had not anticipated. "Because when I saw you cast down by those who should have protected you, I saw myself. I saw the moment when I chose darkness over light, power over principle, and I thought, perhaps if I could save you, if I could protect one innocent soul from the cruelty of this world, then perhaps my existence might have some meaning beyond mere survival." He took a step back, putting distance between them. "I ask nothing of you, Eleanor. I do not seek to claim you or possess you. I do not even ask for your friendship, though I confess your letters have meant more to me than I can express. I seek only to ensure that you and your child survive in a world that cares nothing for the weak. When your child is born and you are safe, I will withdraw from your life. You need never see me again." Eleanor's hand remained on her belly, feeling the child move within her. She thought of all the letters, all the honesty and pain they had contained. She thought of how this creature, this damned thing, had shown her more kindness than any living soul since Thomas died. And she made a decision that would change everything. "I do not want you to withdraw," she said softly. "I do not pretend to understand what you are or why you have chosen to help me, but I know that you have saved my life and the life of my child. And I know that the words you have written to me come from a soul in torment, a soul that perhaps deserves compassion as much as condemnation. If you are willing, I would continue our correspondence. I would know you not as a monster of legend, but as the being you truly are." Dracula stared at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes. Hope, perhaps, or disbelief, or the painful recognition that she offered him something he had not dared to want. "You do not fear me," he said, and it was not quite a question. "I should," Eleanor replied, "but I do not. Perhaps that makes me foolish. Or perhaps it makes me the only person in London who can see past the monster to the man who once was." "The man who once was died centuries ago," Dracula said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps," Eleanor said, "or perhaps he merely sleeps, waiting for a reason to wake." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Those men, the hunters, will they return?" "They will try," Dracula said, "but I will ensure they do not succeed." He hesitated, then spoke again. "Eleanor, you must understand. My protection comes at a cost, not to you but to those who threaten you. I am not a hero from a fairy tale. I am what I am, and that means I will kill to keep you safe. If that troubles you, if you cannot accept it, then tell me now, and I will find another way to help you from a distance." Eleanor thought of Edmund Ashford's cruelty, of his father's greed, of Silas Griggs's vicious hands. She thought of all the women who had suffered under their authority, all the lives destroyed by their callousness. And she thought of the child within her, who deserved a chance to live in a world with at least one person willing to stand against injustice. "I can accept it," she said. "God forgive me, but I can accept it. Then I will keep you safe," Dracula promised, "no matter what comes, no matter who stands against us. You have my word, and I have never broken a vow." He bowed to her, a gesture of such old-world courtesy that it seemed absurd in the gas-lit street of industrial London. Then he melted back into the shadows, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and her racing heart. She continued her walk home, her mind churning with all that had happened. She had just made a pact with a vampire, had accepted his protection, knowing what it meant. She should feel horror, should feel damned, but all she felt was relief. And beneath that, buried deep but undeniable, a strange connection to the lonely creature who had chosen her, of all people, to protect. She did not understand it, could not explain it, but she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that her fate and Dracula's were now bound together, for better or worse, until death or something beyond death parted them. In the shadows of London, other forces were gathering. The vampire hunters would not give up so easily. And there were older things than Dracula in the darkness, ancient enemies who would see any connection between vampire and mortal as an opportunity for destruction. The storm was coming, and Eleanor Whitmore stood at its center, carrying new life within her while befriended by the undead. It was a situation that could only end in tragedy or miracle, and the line between the two had never been thinner. The confrontation with the vampire hunters marked a turning point. Eleanor could no longer pretend that her life was ordinary, that the protection she received came without consequence. The hunters would return, Dracula had warned, and they would bring others. The Catholic Church had been fighting vampires for centuries, and they did not abandon their crusades easily. Eleanor found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, seeing threats in every shadow, every stranger who lingered too long near the factory gates. But Dracula kept his word. She never saw him during the daylight hours, but at night she felt his presence like a guardian spirit hovering at the edges of her awareness. Sometimes she would glimpse a dark figure on the rooftops as she walked home. Sometimes she would find small gifts left at her door, books of poetry or pressed flowers, tokens that spoke of a gentleness at odds with his fearsome reputation. And the letters continued, now more frequent, more intimate. He wrote of his mortal life, of the wife and children he had lost to plague and war centuries ago. He wrote of the bargain he had made with darkness, trading his soul for the power to defend his land, only to discover too late that such power came with an unquenchable thirst for blood. Eleanor wrote back with equal honesty. She told him of her childhood in the countryside, of the poverty that had driven her family to London's factories, of meeting Thomas and the brief happiness they had shared before death tore him away. She wrote of her fears for the child, wondered aloud what kind of mother she would be, whether she could protect her baby in a world so full of cruelty. And Dracula, this ancient monster, responded with a wisdom and compassion that no living man had ever shown her. It was in the 7th month of her pregnancy that the hunters struck again. Eleanor had just left the factory one evening when a carriage pulled alongside her, its door swinging open. Before she could scream, hands reached out and dragged her inside. A cloth soaked in something sweet and chemical was pressed over her face, and darkness swallowed her. She woke in a stone chamber lit by candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on walls covered with religious iconography. Crosses of every size hung from iron hooks, and the air was thick with incense. Her hands were bound, and she lay on a cold floor that smelled of damp and old blood. Panic seized her, and she struggled against her bonds, but they held firm. A door opened, and the 2 hunters from before entered, followed by a 3rd man. This one was older than the others, perhaps 60, with white hair and eyes like chips of ice. He wore the robes of a high-ranking priest, and around his neck hung a cross of solid silver that seemed to glow in the candlelight. He studied Eleanor with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Eleanor Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to obedience. "I am Father Mikhail Vasilescu, and I have dedicated my life to hunting the creatures that plague humanity. You have been consorting with the vampire Dracula, perhaps the most ancient and dangerous of all his kind. Whether you do so willingly or under his thrall, we cannot be certain. But we can save you. We can free you from his influence and protect you from the damnation that awaits those who traffic with the undead." Eleanor fought to keep her voice steady. "I am not under any thrall. Count Dracula has helped me when no one else would. He has harmed no innocent person. The men he killed were monsters themselves." Father Vasilescu's expression hardened. "You defend him? You, a Christian woman, defend a creature that was excommunicated by the Church, that drinks the blood of the living and walks in defiance of God's natural order. His corruption has already begun its work on you, but we will burn it out. We will purify you, even if the process destroys you. Better you die pure than live damned." Terror gripped Eleanor's heart. "What do you mean? What are you going to do to me?" The younger hunter stepped forward, his face twisted with fanatical zeal. "We will use you as bait," he said. "The vampire has formed an attachment to you, one that defies nature. He will come for you, and when he does, we will be ready. We have consecrated this place with holy water and blessed every stone with prayers. We have weapons blessed by the Pope himself. This will be Dracula's tomb." "You will kill me along with him," Eleanor said, understanding flooding through her. "You do not care if I survive. Your mortal life is temporary," Father Vasilescu said coldly. "Your immortal soul is eternal. We will save the latter, even if we must sacrifice the former. And if the child within you dies as well, then at least it will die innocent, untouched by the vampire's evil." He turned to the others. "Prepare the chamber. He will come at nightfall, and we must be ready." They left her alone in the cold stone room, and Eleanor wept. Not for herself, though she was terrified, but for her child. The baby moved within her, oblivious to the danger, trusting that its mother would keep it safe. And Eleanor had failed. She had allowed herself to believe that Dracula's protection was absolute, that his power could shield her from all harm. But these men had found a way to use her against him, and now both she and the being who had shown her kindness would die because of her foolishness. Night fell, and with it came a silence so profound that Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. The hunters positioned themselves around the chamber, holding crosses and vials of holy water, their weapons gleaming in the candlelight. Father Vasilescu stood at the center, his Bible open, his lips moving in constant prayer. They were ready. They were confident. They believed their God would deliver them victory. The candles flickered, though there was no wind. The temperature dropped until Eleanor could see her breath misting in the air. And then he was there, though none of them had seen him enter. Dracula stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a physical force. His eyes found Eleanor immediately, and she saw the rage in them, a fury so absolute that it seemed to darken the very air around him. "You dare," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the chamber. "You dare to take what is mine to protect." Father Vasilescu raised his cross. "In the name of God, I command you to depart, foul creature. You have no power here. This place is consecrated ground." Dracula laughed, and it was a terrible sound. "Consecrated ground," he repeated. "Tell me, priest, how many innocents has your church burned? How many have been tortured and killed in the name of your God? You stand on ground soaked in the blood of martyrs, and you speak to me of holiness." He moved forward, and though the hunters thrust their crosses at him, though they splashed him with holy water that hissed and smoked against his skin, he did not stop. The younger hunter lunged with a wooden stake, aiming for Dracula's heart. The vampire caught his wrist and twisted, and the crack of breaking bone echoed through the chamber. The hunter screamed and fell, and Dracula stepped over him without a second glance. The second hunter attacked with a silver blade, managing to slice across Dracula's arm. Black blood welled from the wound, but the vampire barely seemed to notice. He struck the man across the face with the back of his hand, and the hunter flew across the room to crash against the stone wall and lie still. Father Vasilescu began to chant in Latin, his voice growing louder, more desperate. He held up a golden reliquary, inside which rested what he claimed was a splinter of the true cross. The relic glowed with a pale light, and when Dracula approached, he actually recoiled, his face contorting with pain. "You see," the priest shouted triumphantly, "the power of Christ compels you, demon. You cannot stand against the might of God." Dracula snarled, his fangs bared, his civilized veneer stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. "Perhaps your God has power, priest. Perhaps there is something in your relics that still burns me. But I have faced the armies of empires and survived. I have endured centuries of damnation, and I will not be stopped by one zealot with a piece of old wood." He lunged forward, and though the light from the reliquary seared his flesh, though smoke rose from his skin where the holy power touched him, he did not stop. He seized Father Vasilescu by the throat and lifted him from the ground. The priest's eyes bulged, his hands clawing uselessly at the iron grip that was crushing his windpipe. Eleanor, still bound on the floor, cried out, "Do not kill him, please. If you kill a priest, they will never stop hunting you. There will be no peace for either of us." Dracula turned his burning gaze on her, and for a moment she thought he would ignore her plea. But then, slowly, he lowered the priest to the ground and released him. Father Vasilescu collapsed, gasping for air, his face purple. Dracula stood over him, and when he spoke, his voice was cold as the grave. "I spare your life, priest, not because of your God, but because she asked me to. Remember that. Remember that a monster showed you more mercy than you showed her. Take your men and leave this place. If you ever come near her again, if you so much as speak her name, I will find you. And next time, her compassion will not save you." He turned and moved to Eleanor, kneeling beside her. His burned and bleeding hands worked at her bonds, and she saw the pain in his face, the cost of his defiance of the holy symbols. When her hands were free, he gathered her carefully into his arms and stood. "She is under my protection," he said to the broken hunters. That protection is absolute. Test it again at your peril. He carried her from the chamber, moving through the corridors of what she now recognized as an abandoned church, one of many in London that had fallen into disuse and ruin. Once outside, he did not stop until they had reached a carriage waiting in the shadows. He placed her gently inside, then climbed in beside her. Only when they were moving through the dark streets did he finally relax, his body sagging with exhaustion. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor asked, seeing the burns on his hands, the wound on his arm that still wept black blood. "I will heal," he said quietly. "Before dawn there will be no trace of these injuries. But you, are you unharmed? Did they hurt you, or the child?" Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "They spoke of using me as bait, of burning out your corruption. They were willing to let me die, willing to kill my child, all in the name of righteousness." Dracula's jaw clenched. "Righteousness," he repeated bitterly. "I have seen more evil done in the name of righteousness than I have ever witnessed in the darkest pits of hell. These men believe they serve God, but they serve only their own fear and hatred." He looked at her and his expression softened. "I am sorry, Eleanor. I should have foreseen this. I should have protected you better." "You came for me," Eleanor said. "You faced holy relics that burned you, fought through pain to save me. No one has ever," she paused, her voice breaking, "no one has ever cared for me so much." Dracula was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, his burned fingers gentle despite their wounds. "You asked me once why I chose to help you," he said. "I told you it was because I saw myself in your suffering. But that was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you reminded me what it was to be human. Your courage, your refusal to surrender to despair, your capacity for compassion even in the face of cruelty. These things I thought lost to me forever. You have given me something I have not had in centuries. Hope. The hope that perhaps even one such as I might find redemption." Tears continued to fall down Eleanor's cheeks, but they were not tears of fear now. "How can you speak of redemption when you kill to protect me?" "Because I do not kill for pleasure anymore," Dracula said. "I do not kill the innocent. I have become what I am, a predator, a creature of darkness. But perhaps even a predator can choose its prey. Perhaps even a monster can protect rather than destroy. It is not redemption in the eyes of God, perhaps. But it is something. It is more than I have had in a very long time." The carriage brought them to Eleanor's apartment, and Dracula helped her inside. He looked around the modest rooms and seemed troubled. "You cannot stay here," he said. "The hunters know where you live. They will come again, and next time they may not bother with attempts to save your soul. They may simply kill you to deny me what I protect." "Then where can I go?" Eleanor asked, feeling despair creep in again. "I have no family, no friends who would shelter me from the church." Dracula hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I have a house on the outskirts of London. It is secluded, surrounded by walls and gates. No one enters without my permission. You would be safe there. I would not," he added quickly, "presume upon your virtue. You would have your own chambers, your own privacy. I would be present only to ensure your safety." Eleanor looked at him, this creature of legend standing in her small apartment, his clothes still smoking from the holy water, his hands still healing from the burns. She thought of the hunters and their fanatical certainty, their willingness to sacrifice her and her child. She thought of the child itself, moving within her, depending on her to make the right choice. And she thought of the loneliness in Dracula's eyes, the centuries of isolation that had driven him to this desperate need for connection. "I will come," she said, "not because I have no other choice, though that is true enough, but because I trust you. Whatever you are, whatever darkness lives within you, you have shown me only kindness. That is more than most humans can claim." Dracula bowed his head, and when he looked up again, his eyes glistened with something that might have been tears if vampires could weep. "You honor me, Eleanor," he said. "I will guard your life and your child's with all the power I possess. No hunter, no enemy, nothing in this world or the next will harm you while I exist." He helped her pack her few belongings, and as dawn approached, he led her to his carriage once more. They rode through the awakening city, leaving behind the factories and tenements for estates and open ground. The house he brought her to was indeed Gothic, all dark stone and pointed arches, surrounded by iron gates and high walls. But inside it was surprisingly comfortable, filled with antiques and artwork from across centuries. He showed her to a suite of rooms on the second floor, well appointed with a large bed, a writing desk and windows that looked out over gardens gone wild. "Your chambers," he said. "No one will disturb you here. I ask only that you not enter the east wing where I keep my own quarters. The sunlight does not reach there, and it is," he paused, "not fit for mortal eyes." Eleanor nodded, too exhausted to argue or question. She lay down upon the bed and Dracula drew the curtains to dim the room. "Sleep," he said gently. "I will watch over you." And for the first time in months, Eleanor Whitmore slept without fear, knowing that the monster in the darkness was standing guard, and that sometimes monsters were the only things that could protect you from the cruelty of men. The weeks Eleanor spent in Dracula's mansion were the strangest of her life. By day she had the run of the house, exploring its labyrinthine corridors and dusty libraries, filled with books in languages she could not read. The servants, few as they were, seemed more shadow than substance, appearing when needed and vanishing just as quickly. She never saw them clearly, never heard them speak. Only Renfield, the mad creature who served as Dracula's primary attendant, made himself known, scuttling through the halls, muttering to himself about blood and immortality. But at night, when darkness claimed the world, Dracula would emerge from his chambers in the East Wing. He would find Eleanor in the library or the sitting room, and they would talk for hours. He told her stories of his mortal life, of battles fought and lost, of the woman he had loved and the children taken by plague. He spoke of the moment he had become what he was, drinking from an ancient vampire as enemy armies burned his castle, choosing damnation over defeat. And Eleanor, in turn, shared her own stories, smaller perhaps, but no less meaningful. She spoke of her dreams for her child, of the world she hoped to give them, of the fear that she would fail as her own mother had failed, unable to protect what she loved most. In these conversations, something impossible began to grow. Eleanor had thought herself immune to romantic feeling after Thomas's death, had believed that part of her heart had died with him. But Dracula, for all his monstrous nature, spoke to something deep within her. His loneliness mirrored her own. His fierce protectiveness awakened feelings she had thought lost forever, and beneath the darkness of what he was, she glimpsed the remnants of the man he had been, noble and tormented and capable of great tenderness. Dracula, for his part, found himself drawn to Eleanor in ways that terrified him. He had taken lovers across the centuries, victims and willing participants alike, but none had touched his heart. He had thought that organ long since withered to nothing, but Eleanor's courage, her compassion even for a monster, her refusal to judge him solely by what he had become rather than what he had been, these things awakened in him emotions he had believed forever lost. He began to dream again, something he had not done in centuries, and in those dreams he was mortal once more, standing in sunlight with Eleanor beside him and her child in his arms. It was a fantasy, of course, impossible and foolish. He was damned, cursed to feed on blood and hide from the sun. She was mortal, carrying new life, everything he could never be. The gulf between them was absolute, unbridgeable, and yet in the darkness of his mansion, in those stolen hours of conversation, they both allowed themselves to forget, to pretend that perhaps in some other world they might have been something other than vampire and victim, protector and protected. The child came in the 9th month, as all children do. Eleanor's labor began just after sunset, and Dracula summoned a midwife, an old woman who asked no questions and feared nothing. For 12 hours Eleanor struggled, and Dracula remained outside her chambers, pacing like an expectant father, his hands clenched into fists. Renfield watched him with knowing eyes, cackling softly. "You care for them," the mad servant said. "You care for the mortal woman and her mortal child. How very human of you, master, how very weak." Dracula seized Renfield by the throat and slammed him against the wall. "Speak carefully," he snarled, "or I will teach you that there are fates worse than the madness you already embrace." When dawn approached, and the child had still not come, Dracula did something he had not done in centuries. He prayed, not to God who had forsaken him long ago, but to whatever powers might still listen to a damned soul. He begged for Eleanor's life and the life of her child. He offered anything, everything, even the last tattered remnants of his existence. "Just let them live," he whispered into the darkness. "Let them live, and I will trouble this world no more." As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, forcing him to retreat to his lightless chambers, he heard it, the sound of a newborn's cry, strong and clear. Eleanor had survived. The child had survived. He sank to his knees in the darkness of his room, and for the first time since his transformation, Dracula wept. When night fell again, he went to Eleanor's chambers. She lay in the bed, exhausted but alive, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she drew back the blanket, Dracula saw the child. A girl, perfect and beautiful, with wisps of dark hair and grey eyes that seemed to look directly at him. Eleanor smiled, tired but happy. "Her name is Catherine," she said. "After my mother. Would you like to hold her?" Dracula hesitated, his hands trembling. "I should not. I am not. I cannot." But Eleanor was already extending the child toward him, and before he could protest further, he found himself cradling the infant. She was so small, so fragile, so impossibly alive. Her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, and he felt something break inside him. This was what he had lost. This was what he had sacrificed for power and immortality. The simple, profound miracle of new life, of innocence, of hope. "She is beautiful," he whispered, "like her mother." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I want you to be her godfather," she said. "I know what that means, to ask such a thing of you. But you saved us. You protected us when no one else would. I want her to know when she is old enough to understand that there are different kinds of monsters in this world. Some wear human faces and do terrible things, and some," she looked at him with an expression that made his dead heart ache, "some wear monstrous faces but do good." Dracula carefully returned the child to her mother's arms. "I am honored," he said, "more than you can know. But Eleanor, you must understand, the hunters will never stop. Father Vasilescu and his kind, they believe their cause is righteous. They will come for you again, and next time they will bring an army. I can protect you from many things, but I cannot stand against the full might of the church. Not forever." "Then what do we do?" Eleanor asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Where can we go that they will not find us?" Dracula was silent for a long moment. "There is a place," he said finally. "My homeland, the mountains of Transylvania, where my castle still stands. It is remote, far from the reach of London's hunters. I have servants there, loyal and discreet. You would be safe. You and Catherine both." "You mean for us to leave England?" Eleanor said. "To live in your castle, in the land of vampires and darkness?" "I mean for you to live," Dracula replied. "Here, you are in constant danger. Every night I must guard against those who would destroy you to hurt me. But in Transylvania, in my domain, I am strongest. No hunter would dare approach. You could raise your child in peace." She paused, then asked the question that terrified her. "And you? Would you be there?" Dracula moved to the window, looking out at the night. "I would be there," he said. "I would protect you always. But Eleanor, you must understand what that means. To live in a vampire's castle, to raise your child in the shadow of the undead, it is not a natural life. It is not what any mother would choose for her child." Eleanor looked down at Catherine, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What mother would choose poverty?" she asked. "What mother would choose to see her child starve in the streets, or be worked to death in a factory? You offer us safety, protection, a life free from the cruelty I have known. How is that worse than what waits for us here?" "Because, eventually," Dracula said, turning to face her, "your daughter will grow. She will ask questions. She will want to know why her protector never sees the sun, why he drinks only wine dark as blood, why servants fear and revere him. She will learn what I am, and when she does, she may come to hate you for keeping her in a monster's house. Or she may understand," Eleanor replied, "that you are more than what you appear, that beneath the curse is a soul worth knowing." She met his gaze. "I am not naive, Count Dracula. I know what you are. I know what you do to survive. But I also know that you have shown me more humanity than any human ever has. If that makes me damned, then I accept damnation. I would rather be damned and safe than righteous and dead." Dracula stared at her, and in that moment the last of his resistance crumbled. "Very well," he said. "We leave in 3 nights. I will make the arrangements. You and Catherine will come with me to Transylvania, and there you will live under my protection for as long as you wish it." But even as he spoke, he knew that someone was listening. In the shadows beyond the mansion, Father Vasilescu and his hunters had found them. They had tracked Eleanor to this place through informants and divine guidance, or so they believed. And they had brought with them something they believed would end Dracula's existence forever. An ancient relic recovered from the Vatican's deepest vaults. The stake that had killed the first vampire, blessed by the first pope, imbued with power that could destroy even the most ancient of the undead. The attack came on the second night, hours before dawn. They breached the walls with holy water and prayers, burning through Dracula's protective wards. They stormed the mansion with torches and crosses, a dozen hunters led by Father Vasilescu himself. Dracula met them in the great hall, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare," he roared. "After I spared your life, you dare to attack my home?" "You are an abomination," Father Vasilescu shouted back. "You corrupt innocence and defy God's will. Tonight, your reign of darkness ends." He raised the ancient stake, and even from across the hall, Dracula could feel its power, a searing wrongness that made his very existence scream in protest. The battle was brutal and swift. Dracula tore through the hunters like paper, his speed and strength overwhelming even their holy weapons. But there were too many, and they had prepared too well. Silver nets fell upon him, burning his flesh. Holy water splashed across his face, blinding him. And through the chaos, Father Vasilescu advanced with the stake held high. Dracula struggled, but the nets held him. The priest stood over him, triumph in his eyes. "Any last words, demon?" he asked. Dracula looked past him to where Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, Catherine in her arms, horror on her face. "Yes," he said. He looked back at the priest. "Tell them, that I tried, that in the end, a monster loved them more than God ever did." Father Vasilescu raised the stake, preparing for the killing blow, but before he could strike, Eleanor's voice rang out. "Stop." She descended the stairs, her child clutched to her chest. "In the name of mercy, stop. Kill him and you kill the only being who ever protected us." "Step aside, woman," the priest commanded. "This does not concern you." "It concerns me entirely," Eleanor said, her voice strong despite her fear. "You speak of God's will and righteousness, but I see only murder. Count Dracula has killed, yes, but only those who deserved it, only those who preyed upon the innocent. While you, Father, you who claim to serve God, would slaughter a mother and child to complete your crusade." The priest's face twisted with anger. "I would never harm you or your child. We fight to save your soul." "Then save it now," Eleanor said. "Let him go. Withdraw your hunters. Abandon your crusade. And I swear by all that is holy that we will leave England. We will go to his homeland and trouble you no more. You will have your victory. London will be free of the vampire. Is that not enough?" Father Vasilescu hesitated, torn between his fanatical desire to destroy Dracula and the very real fear of what it would mean to harm a mother and infant. The other hunters looked to him for guidance, their weapons wavering. In that moment of hesitation, Dracula acted. With a surge of inhuman strength, he tore through the silver nets, ignoring the agony as they seared his flesh. He seized Father Vasilescu and held him before the other hunters like a shield. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, "or I take your priest's life, and all the holy relics in the world will not save him." The hunters hesitated. Then slowly, one by one, they lowered their crosses and stakes. Dracula backed toward the stairs, still holding the priest. Eleanor met him there, and together they ascended, leaving the hunters in the great hall below. Once in Eleanor's chambers, Dracula released the priest, shoving him toward the door. "You have 1 hour to gather your men and leave," he said. "If you are still on my grounds when dawn comes, I will hunt every one of you through London's streets until not one remains. And I will do it in daylight, even if it burns me to ashes. This I swear." Father Vasilescu stumbled back, his face pale. "You would die to kill us?" "I would die to protect them," Dracula corrected. "Remember that, priest. Remember that the monster had more love in his damned heart than all your righteous hatred. The hunters withdrew, carrying their wounded, their defeat absolute. When they were gone, Dracula collapsed, his body ravaged by the silver and holy water. Eleanor set Catherine in her cradle and rushed to him, helping him to the bed. "You are hurt," she said, seeing the burns, the deep wounds that wept black blood. "I will heal," he whispered. "But dawn comes soon. I must return to my chambers before the sun rises, or I will burn." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You stay here. We will draw the curtains, block every window. You will rest here where I can tend your wounds." Dracula looked at her with something like wonder. "You would risk keeping me here, in the light of day." "You trust me that much?" "I trust you with my life," Eleanor said, "and with Catherine's life, that is all the trust that matters." So Dracula remained in Eleanor's chambers as dawn broke over London. The heavy curtains kept out the killing light, and Eleanor sat beside him, bathing his wounds with cool water, speaking softly to him as he drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, he reached for her hand and held it with a grip that was surprisingly gentle for a creature of such power. "Eleanor," he whispered, "if I do not survive this day, if the wounds are too grievous, you must promise me something." "You will survive," she said firmly. "You are too stubborn to die." "Promise me," he insisted. "Promise me that you will take Catherine and go to my castle in Transylvania. I have left instructions with Renfield. Everything I own will be yours. The money, the estates, everything. You will never want for anything. Just promise me you will keep her safe, keep her innocent. Do not let the darkness of this world corrupt her as it corrupted me." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. "I promise," she whispered, "but you will be there to see her grow. You will be there to protect us both." Dracula smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look almost human. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps there is hope for a monster after all." He survived the day, though it was a near thing. By the time night fell again and his strength returned, Eleanor had made her decision. They would go to Transylvania, the three of them together. Not as master and servant, not as vampire and victim, but as something else. A family, perhaps strange and impossible, but a family nonetheless. The journey took weeks, traveling by night through France and the German states into the wild lands of Eastern Europe. Catherine thrived, growing stronger each day, and Eleanor found herself happier than she had been in years. Dracula proved to be surprisingly good with the child, holding her gently, telling her stories in languages she could not understand, watching over her sleep with eyes that held both sorrow and joy. The castle, when they finally reached it, was ancient and crumbling, but Eleanor saw its potential. With work, with care, it could be a home. And so it became one. Eleanor took charge of the restoration, hiring villagers who were loyal to Dracula out of fear and old debts. Slowly the castle came back to life, filled with the sounds of hammers and saws by day and Eleanor's laughter by night. Years passed. Catherine grew from infant to child, bright and curious with her mother's courage and something of Dracula's intensity. She knew what Dracula was, had always known, but she felt no fear. To her, he was simply the guardian who protected them, the teacher who educated her in languages and history, the lonely figure who stood at the window each night looking out over the mountains with an expression of profound sadness. Eleanor aged as mortals do. Silver threaded through her auburn hair and lines appeared at the corners of her eyes, but Dracula remained unchanged, eternally young, eternally damned. And as Eleanor grew older, she began to understand the true tragedy of their relationship. She loved him. She had loved him perhaps since that night when he had faced down the hunters to save her. But she was mortal, and he was not. She would die, and he would continue forever alone again. It was on Catherine's 10th birthday that Eleanor finally spoke of it. They stood together on the battlements, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. "You should turn me," she said quietly. "Make me what you are, so I can stay with you and Catherine forever." Dracula turned to her, anguish in his eyes. "I cannot," he said. "To turn you would be to damn you, to take your soul and bind it to darkness. I would sooner walk into the sun than do that to you." "But I would choose it," Eleanor insisted. I would choose an eternity with you over a mortal life alone. Please, do not force me to leave you." Dracula took her hands in his, and there were tears on his face now, real tears that he had not shed since the night Catherine was born. "My dearest Eleanor," he said, "you have given me more than I deserved. You have given me purpose, hope, something to exist for beyond mere survival. You have treated me not as a monster, but as a man. That is a gift beyond price. But I will not repay that gift by stealing your humanity, by making you into what I am. You will live your natural span, and when death comes for you, you will go to it clean and pure. And I will remain as I have always remained, alone but grateful for the time we had." Eleanor wept then, knowing he would not change his mind, and so the years continued, each one more precious than the last. She watched Catherine grow into a young woman, intelligent and kind, untouched by the darkness of the world. And she grew old in Dracula's castle, surrounded by his protection and his love, a love he never spoke aloud but showed in 1,000 small ways. When Eleanor finally took to her bed for the last time, Catherine by her side and Dracula holding her hand, she felt no fear. She had lived a full life, had raised a daughter who would carry on her strength and compassion, and she had loved and been loved by someone who had given her everything he was capable of giving. "I am not afraid," she whispered to Dracula. "I am only sorry to leave you alone again." Dracula pressed her hand to his cold cheek. "You have never left me alone," he said. "You will live in my memory for as long as I exist. And that, my dear Eleanor, may well be forever." She smiled, then closed her eyes and let go. Dracula remained at her bedside through the night, holding her hand even after the warmth had left it. When dawn came, he carried her body to the chapel and laid her in a tomb of white marble. He carved her name himself, along with words that came from his ancient heart. "Here lies Eleanor Whitmore, who saw past the monster to the man and loved them both." Catherine remained at the castle, choosing to stay with the only father she had ever truly known. And Dracula, the ancient vampire, the creature of darkness, found that he could go on. Not because he wanted to, but because Eleanor had given him a reason. She had shown him that even the damned could know love, could protect innocence, could matter. And so he continued guarding Catherine as she grew older, protecting the villagers from other predators, becoming not the monster of legend but the dark guardian of the mountains. He never took another companion, never loved again. Eleanor had been his redemption, his one chance at something beyond damnation. And though she was gone, the memory of her was enough to sustain him through the long centuries that followed. He had been a warrior, a nobleman, a monster. But in the end, he had been something more. He had been loved by a good woman who saw not what he was, but who he had been and who he tried to be. And that, perhaps, was the closest thing to salvation a vampire could ever know. The story ends not with fire or glory, not with final death or ultimate redemption, but with a lonely figure standing at a castle window, looking out over moonlit mountains, remembering a woman who had given him hope in his darkest hour. And in that remembering, in that eternal vigil, there was both tragedy and grace. For Count Dracula had learned that monsters could love, could protect, could matter. And though he remained damned, though he would walk in darkness forever, he knew that once, just once, he had been worthy of the light.